Hello everybody and welcome back to At the Farm Gate. I'm Jack Hughes, biosecurity advisor at LiveTech Systems and your host for today's episode, a step-by-step how to build a biosecurity plan that works. We're unpacking the practical side of biosecurity, from the key steps to getting started to the common pitfalls, helpful tools and real-world success stories. Joining me today is Dr. Paul Tallin, a fellow biosecurity advisor at LiveTech, to share expert insights and guidance to help you put a strong, workable plan in place. So let's get into it. Hi Paul, great to have you with us today. Can you tell us and our listeners a bit more about your role here at LiveTech and your background in biosecurity?
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Hello, everybody. Yeah, my role at LiveTech, I'm one of the biosecurity advisors. I tend to do a lot of the thinking and that behind a lot of what we look at. I take upon myself to research quite heavily what is actually going on when we've been out and doing polls and things like that to find out real life situations of why biosecurity tends to break down on some farms. Obviously, my role is a face-to-face role normally, where I actually talk to the farmers, but I'm also very much looking at digital solutions and how we can transfer that knowledge that we have in our heads onto a digital platform where people will be able to do their own biosecurity plans with a lot of support behind them.
Sounds great, Paul. And is there any information you can give people about the background, how you got into this role, where you came from?
Yeah, basically, I am a farmer's son from Cornwall, as you may tell from my accent, even though I've not been in Cornwall since 1987. Done various jobs. I've lectured, I've advised, I've also, for my sins, been a red tractor auditor for a number of years. As well as that, I've also been a poultry farmer in my own right as well, having a business growing free range poultry, where every biosecurity rule there is, I would have broken and ignored, normally to my detriment. So, from the point of view of experience, I have a very long experience of working with poultry and working with poultry diseases. I have a doctor in front of me now because I did actually attend university and stayed on, and I needed to play a bit more rugby, so a PhD was a good option to keep me at college for a little bit longer. But it's extremely useful, and it's basically given me the background to be able to look at the science, look at what people are doing in a much more methodical detail than maybe we would normally.
Oh, that's great, Paul. And as you mentioned that you are a poultry farmer, you come from the real world in poultry farming, and as you well stipulated there, you've probably broken every rule in the biosecurity protocol, as many producers do, just trying to get through the day. So that's a good place to start. I mean, what would you say is the first essential steps for all farmers and producers should be taking in developing biosecurity measures that work on farm and making that robust biosecurity plan?
Well, the first thing is to actually understand what you're doing at the moment and actually understand, like I say, what you're doing, but also you need to understand how viruses move, how diseases get in and get out. And I think the first step from a farmer point of view is maybe to actually open themselves up to listening to other viewpoints. As a farmer, we're very can be normally are very set in our ways. If something isn't broke, don't bother fixing it. But actually, sometimes you're not fixing it because you've been lucky. And actually, it's worth, as a farmer, that mental mindset to say, hang on, there are other good farms here that have had real disease issues and stuff, and they've been doing it right. Have I just been lucky, or am I doing something really right here? But actually, to get into that mindset, to actually want to look at these things, and then take the advice, research it, take the advice, and actually, and then maybe have a proper think, because most farmers are very logical thinkers. That's how we do things. Actually, biosecurity can be and is a very logical process. But the first thing you need to do is get into the right mindset that actually, even though your system may not be broken, it could be broken. And we've seen that with all the disease pressures and the outbreaks. again, our experience is that what you would look at as outwardly very biosecure premises have gone down. And when we've looked at it, 9 times out of 10, there's a fairly obvious entry point that people have ignored, or they've been complacent, or things like that. So, yeah. So that's the first thing you need to do, is just basically get in the right mindset to actually say, yes, we need to actually do something about this. 'Cause again, we didn't have bird flu 15 years ago, 10 years ago. So we didn't have to worry about it. Now we have to worry about it. So completely different to what it was. So we can't carry on doing what we've always done, because that doesn't necessarily work anymore.
Yeah, I think you knocked the nail right on the head there, Paul. We are a reactive industry, or have been a reactive industry, and not necessarily proactive. And we're always looking at the big factors of what has detriment on farm, the avian influenza and the salmonella. But if we start to look at them smaller challenges, what potentially are coming into farm and costing us as producers, and bringing that income down level, either that through mortality or loss in production, we will then be prepared for the bigger picture if anything was to come around with avian influenza or salmonella. That's not to say, you're going to be safe at all times, but to have that proactive approach is a lot better than being reactive when the problem occurs.
Yeah, I completely agree, Jack. You've got, again, we use these little words, but biosecurity 365, trying to explain to somebody that there is no such thing as a heightened biosecure period, or heightened biosecurity. If you think there's a lot of pressure out there, you heighten your biosecurity. Actually, what you should be doing is you should be at a level of biosecurity that controls disease all year round. And like you said quite rightly there, Jack, yes, we do concentrate on the avian influenzas. We're looking, again, poultry here, but we look at pigs, we look at ASF. It's the small challenges, and those are the ones that really could also benefit big time. We accept that if one shed gets something, we're going to treat the whole farm. Well, actually, we should be asking why. We shouldn't actually need to treat the whole farm. We should be able to isolate a problem in one shed and leave it in one shed. And it comes back to that mindset. I'm not going to accept that it's going to automatically go from shed to shed to shed. Because if you accept that, then it's sort of like saying, well, I accept a low level of biosecurity here because I should be able to stop it.
Exactly. I mean, that leads on to the next question. Here at LiveTech, we offer advice and ways of assessing biosecurity on farms that we go in and visit. But how can farmers assess the current biosecurity risks on their own farm? Are there checklists out there? Are there tools they can use, services they can use to get a deeper insight into what they're actually doing on farm is effective, and it's not just compliant, it's actually working for them?
Well, you have used the right word there, Jack, compliant. And if you look on, again, they are very good. You look on the government website and things like that, and they will tell you what you should be doing from the point of view of biosecurity and things like that. But what we find is, and again, there are loads of those freebies out there. You can get your chemical supplier will come along and do some assessments for you. But unfortunately, most of them, however much you'd like to think they're independently, there's always alternative. They're always maybe trying to sell you chemical, things like that. So they're not 100% independent, and the biosecurity plans will necessarily rely on such things as chemical control, not actual change of behaviour or change of procedures, which is what we look at a lot more. Historically, as LiveTech, we would be paid to come and do biosecurity assessments on your farm, where one of us would come along. We still do that to a very large extent when we're asked, but there's only a few of us, and we don't have the capacity to go and visit every single farm in the country to actually do these things on. So one of the other ways that you can now assess the biosecurity on the farm is we've developed an app where we've put down basically everything that we look at on a farm from the outside all the way in, and for a series of questions and standard answers and fairly detailed answers that you need to put in there to assess where you are. And it's straightforward. It's easy to actually, honestly, because that's the benefit of it. It's you're not looking for your top marks or anything like that. There is a score at the end of it, but the score doesn't really matter at the start, or it doesn't matter a great deal, because what you're trying to do is just assess where you are and benchmark your farm against other people's, just to see what you are doing. And obviously then if things start to flag up, then you've got the option then to contact us, or we will contact you maybe, to actually flag those areas where you've maybe put a tick in a box where we would rather you didn't have a tick in a box, to actually flag those early warnings up that maybe there's an issue there that you may be overlooking or you're not looking.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the EBAS, we spoke heavily about that in the first podcast with Jules, and around what that system's able to do, and the ability to have an advisor in your pocket. That's not an audit, it's an assessment. It's a way of you being able to understand where you can make changes and how them changes can affect the biosecurity on that farm. And I think that leads nicely to, what does a strong biosecurity routine look like for a broiler farmer, for a layer farmer, a turkey farmer? What is a strong routine for these producers to be doing daily?
Yeah, I always say to people, the strongest routine you can have for a biosecurity is possibly the simplest routine and the easiest routine that you can achieve. If the strongest biosecurity is the easiest method of doing something, you will always go to that first. Just straightforward examples like always keeping gates locked, not letting people on who don't need to be on. Just small things like that, making sure that if you have got systems in place, it's the easiest. You do everything. If you're changing your boots or you're changing your shoes, you make sure that you can do it easily. You're not tripping over, you're not falling over, you're not. And again, if you want to know which boots to wear if you've got a system of wearing different boots in different buildings, simple little things like color coding them to actually identify when somebody's not wearing the right boots in the right area. It's not a lot, but actually it makes a huge difference, because that's a very simple way of making sure that happens. Yeah, all those sort of things. If you don't want people onto your farm, then put locks on gates, put signs up, things like that, just to avoid. Because again, from the point of view of the biosecurity risk on a farm, every single person, every bit of equipment, every animal that comes onto your site is a potential risk. So reducing everything all the time, taking that one off, stopping those birds flying into a pond on your farm or something like that, would actually, every time you do something like that, you reduce the risk a little tiny bit. And to be honest with you, most farms are quite biosecure, but as I said at the start, they've all gone down with things like avian flu as well. And it's that last 5 or 10% that we just need to pick up a little bit, that needs to be right.
Yeah, listening to what you say there, but we have conversations about this daily. The human nature is always to find the easiest way of doing something. And if biosecurity is hard, they will find the easiest way to bypass it or get around it. But also, if it's too easy, then it's too easy to bypass. So it's making sure that it's easy and achievable 99% of the time. There is no need for people to bypass it to go and do another job. There's no need for people to bypass it to go to a toilet, to go and get a tool. If everything's in place strategically to ensure that the biosecurity can be carried out as per the job of they're required to be carrying out, then there will be no need to bypass any biosecure measure.
Yeah, it just like I say, a lot of those simple things, people, a very high level of biosecurity on some farms is to actually have a whole tool set for everybody in every individual shed. Most farms, that's not practical. But actually, what would be practical is to hang an adjustable spanner in each shed. Because actually, that would do 99% of what you actually want it to do. And that wouldn't be a big cost, wouldn't be a big issue, but it would mean then you aren't transferring dust or muck from one shed to another. Yeah, it's just sometimes it's quite simple things like that. If again, sometimes even on some really modern and well constructed and clean, perfect concrete everywhere, extra little things that can be done, such as putting in like yellow markers where you want people to walk. So if you're meticulous in wanting to keep the spot clean, why let them walk across the middle of the yard all the time? Actually, just restrict them to a little pathway down the side by painting a little yellow line that goes to the office or something like that. Because most times people go to the office, they don't go anywhere else. And actually, it's little things like that. They all add up because it means that somebody doesn't walk where you don't want them to walk and things like that. So.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's not many jobs you can't do on a poultry farm without a 10mm spanner or a 13mm spanner in a pack of tie wraps. So, and usually you find them in the producer's pocket, but they're moving from unit to unit to unit. And although it might seem like it's a small factor to biosecurity, there is potential for pathogens and bacteria to be moving on them from one shed to the next, and that's really what biosecurity is about, is to maintain not getting a challenge in a shed, but also not getting the challenge to move from that shed to the next unit, to the next unit, to the next unit. And I think that's, fundamental in what biosecurity is. So from your experience, your vast experience in going out to these producers and different production types of farms, what is the most common mistake you see farmers making when it comes to biosecurity?
It depends on which area you're looking at, Jack. I think if you actually look at the external, and as I keep saying, the less you can, regardless of the risk outside the farm, you can reduce the risk on your farm by not letting it on in the first place. And actually, most risks come onto the farm on wheels and tires and or bodies of lorries. They come on feet of people. They come on clothes of people. The first thing you can do is actually the simplest thing, and most people don't, because most people like to show people around sometimes and show what they're doing, is just have that mindset of don't letting people on. Is if that unit is quite capable of being run by two people all the time, the only two people you ever see on that unit are those two, unless you've got somebody else coming in, and then you would look. So not letting people on things, not letting vehicles on. The classic one is obviously letting the dead lorry on to actually come onto your site to clean up. Well, you are just bringing potential disease onto the site. Just as much of interest to those people have a skip in the middle of the site for taking the rubbish away. To be honest with you, I would always say that skip lorry is a far more dirty from a biological point of view than the dead lorry every time, because at least the dead lorry knows he's a problem and does spray down and does follow all the protocols normally. But actually, if you're able to have a system where you actually took those dead birds to the outside of your unit so that the lorry didn't have to come in, it's quite a simple way of doing things. So again, keeping the minimal number of things coming onto your farm minimises the risk you're bringing onto your farm. Obviously, keeping the spot as tidy as possible. When a farm worker complains that his boss said he's OCD about cleanliness, I think, well, what a lucky boss.
Yeah, I mean,
Crack on, keep it clean.
I think you've answered, quite a bit of what I'm about to lead into, but everybody thinks by spending large amounts of money on all singing, all dancing automatic wheel sprayers, not that it's not a good investment, but I don't see that as the priority investment. Shelling out lots of money on something that generally just makes you think that you're doing something rather than actually achieving what you're wanting it to do. So there is measures out there for biosecurity what don't cost a lot of money, what make biosecurity more efficient. So what would you say is, as a short, what are some things what can be added onto farms at a low price, what doesn't cost the farmer a lot, but ensures that they are complying with the biosecurity protocol they have in place for that farm in reducing the risk.
Yeah, if you look outside the farm, a nice simple one, and it's the one that quite amazes me most times, is you go onto a farm and the gate's closed. That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. There's no lock on the gate, so anybody who wants to go in just has to open the gate and go in. So you're not stopping anything. So quite often a padlock or a system to lock your gate is actually a very cheap option, which will actually stop a lot of those van drivers that come and deliver opening up and actually taking it right to your door because he thinks he's been really useful by dropping it at the poultry house door or even putting it inside the cabin or the ante room there, being really useful for you. Well, actually, that's the worst thing they've done because he's just been on 2 or 3 other farms at the same time and done exactly the same thing on them. Yeah, and the other little thing is we look quite often at how people change their clothing and what they do between sheds and using lots of foot dips and different things. One of the things that people think costs a lot of money but in the end doesn't is boots. Is actually appropriate boots where actually a few extra pairs of boots between, so rather than actually having to share boots between units and go into the live bird area with the same boots on that you've worn in another unit because you think you're okay because you've washed them in between and all that sort of stuff, which takes time, takes effort, takes money for the disinfectant. Long term, it's a lot cheaper just to have another set of boots in another building that you change into. And it's always one of those that I don't understand. People will spend tens and tens of thousands on fancy fancy barriers or ANPR on the entrance, things like that, but they won't change boots in a shed because it's hassle and it's things. But most of that reasoning is because most people make it really difficult to change boots. And again, some of the simple things you can do is actually barrier heights, things like that. If you're going to sit down on a barrier, make sure your barrier's the right height so your feet dangle when you're taking your boots off. I'm of an age now. I can't keep my feet. If the seat's too low, I can't keep my feet off the ground. So I will put my socked feet on a dirty bit of the ground, and then you're just transferring muck from one area to another, already on your socks. Yeah, like the simple things. I ought to take shares out in welly firm or something now because everyone's going to go and buy extra wellies. But it is a good thing. And again, it's not even wellies sometimes. It's just you need a nice pair of Crocs or something like that to make it easy for you to change different areas where you're not actually working in them things. So yeah, there's quite a couple simple like a lock on a gate to make sure your gate is locked, and then
Control the control.
yeah, completely control the controllable.
You're in, people and producers and farmers are completely in control of their own farms. They can work out what is acceptable, what can come on and what can go off that farm. So having controls in place to ensure that mainly people who do not need to come on should not be going on to that farm. The rest of it from that point forward is totally controllable from that entry point to the building to the live bird. You cannot control where that DPD or Amazon wagon has been, and allowing that to enter the farm or the postman to come waltzing up to the door to put the post in who's been down every other drive in the district. You don't have control of where he's been, but what you have control of is allowing them to enter your farm.
Yeah, no, exactly right, Jack. It is, like say, it is control the controllable, and again, even like route, like maintenance of your buildings, most of that, most farms I go on, we're all fairly good at doing our own maintenance and that. And if you see a gutter leaking or something like that that's dropping mucky water down next to your shed, then it's not that hard a job to fix that yourself or make sure that it's on the list to be fixed and identify those issues. So yeah, it is. Yeah, it's little. A lot of times it's just that little detail sometimes, and actually, like you say, they don't cost a lot of money. Example, it's common in the broiler industry that when you're thinning, that's probably the last time you need to worry about. You don't start cleaning your yard up and things like that, but it could be 8-10 days between thinning and actually complete depopulation, where that muck that's outside of the buildings you are potentially tramping that around into other areas. And again, the excuse is quite often made that nobody that well, all the birds are going anyway, so it won't matter. But if we look into the history of AI, for example, in broiler farms, which there have been a lot, uh, it normally happens between thinning and depopulation. So anything you can do in that period, and again, it's a little bit of an extension of your 365. It's not every day. It's virtually every hour as well. When if you know that muck outside the shed is a potential hazard, and it's going to cause issues, and even simple little things like not cleaning up that muck and shutting your doors when there's muck in the doorway will start to bend your hinges and make your doors not fit properly, which then later on just results in actually those doors then don't become waterproof, and they don't become vermin proof. And so sometimes there's also other they do eventually, even though that little bit of cleaning up that one time may not actually affect the biosecurity of that spot immediately, over time, those little tasks will actually make sure that what you have got in place is still good and still useful.
As you mentioned, biosecurity 365, yeah. Biosecurity measures and protocols should be in place and followed until them birds leave that site. They're still under your guidance until the end of that flock, and we see it a lot across both broilers and layers where all the birds are going in a week's time and we start to lax off a little bit, which is ultimately when we're talking around specifically around avian influenza is probably one of the worst times. They're not all good times, but it's probably one of the worst times because the birds are due to go. There's no production money left in them birds. So the level of compensation you're going to get back for the level of birds what are going out is next to none. So that is a real issue I do see in the industry when we get towards that end of production, where people just start to step back, start taking equipment out of the shed and start getting ready for the turnaround. And that's the time when that little lapse in concentration can introduce some pathogen into that shed. And just in interest of time, Paul, you mentioned earlier about the EBAS and what we're doing in the digital world. Could you please explain a little bit more to our listeners about what Livestock Protect is and how Livestock Protect is helping enterprises across the poultry industry?
Yeah, we're rolling out Livestock Protect and EBAS. Within Livestock Protect, there is obviously, and for most of the people listening to here, you can get into it fairly quickly. Free app to start with. There's a large area in the front that is free, which does give you some really good information on, again, if there are outbreaks, they show up fairly quickly. But of more interest on that, there's a couple other things. There's an outbreak monitor which you can go back over the last 5 6 years and see where everything's had bird flu in the food pond, to know whether you are intrinsically in a higher risk area anyway, because there are higher risk areas in this country. The other thing that is up to dated and really, really good on it, and it's really worth looking at, is the wild bird deaths, where we're scraping data to show you where wild birds with avian flu are being picked up, because it's not been scientifically proven yet, but actually there are some very good correlations on that when you look at where the live birds have been picked, or the dead wild birds have been picked up, and then you get subsequent commercial flock infections. So keeping your eye on that is really good. Within the actual premium version of the Protect platform, which is a paid one, is that you get the EBAS in its electronic form, and at the moment that is being rolled out quite extensively with some of the bigger commercial enterprises, and that we're using it very much as a risk tool to identify the risk of the whole farming estate that they have, whether they have 10 farms or whether they have 400 farms. It's a way for them to actually look at the farms and see what risks those farms have. And obviously, from a business point of view, then they can actually start to identify whether there are common risks and things, and whether there are ways of financing capital grants, or whether it's just a training training issue, and they need to look at training and how they do their training to actually try to mitigate some of the risks. So it's looking at all the farms in together rather than, and obviously from the point of view of each individual farm doing it, they will also write down to the farm level what's potentially risky at the farm level. But at the immediate start, it is what's wrong with the whole industry? What is everybody not doing? What is everybody missing? And actually, then we can start looking at that. We also on the Access Protect have or not on the Livestock Protect, we have the Access Protect part of it, where we're developing QR code system to again restrict people who come in and off the farm and actually know exactly who is coming on and off farm, so that again a risk profile can be built up of what type of people are coming onto the farm, how often they're coming onto the farm, whether they have contact with the birds, all these sort of things, because from a senior management point of view, nobody really knows. And also, when you look at some of the large farms, you can have hundreds, literally hundreds of movements of lorries and vehicles for every crop that comes in from a broiler point of view. You might have, I was on one the other day where they had over 600 movements just for one crop. And that's a lot of people to sign in, sign out, record, wash down, clean down. And when you look at that, then you start having to look at other systems, and a little spray can at the gate possibly isn't worth the isn't going to do it when you start having that number of movements. You start to have to look at trying to match the biosecurity to the actual amount of movements and that's on the farm, and actually still keep it biosecure, because it gets harder as the farm gets bigger to a large extent.
Yeah, I think by integrating, Access Protect and EBAS and subsequent modules which are going to come to livestock protecting itself is going to be a major factor in helping people understand the monetization of biosecurity. Why are we doing it, and what are the risks coming to our farm? And then when we identify these, we can make changes, we can change mindset, and we can producers to understand that it isn't just about the heightened times, it is about that whole 365. Biosecurity has a return on investment. It will help, it will pay, and it will get you better production on farm if implemented and carried out correctly 365 days a year. So just leading from there, and before we finish, Paul, have you got any success stories or examples of farmers who have been using the system, or they've been using our services and yourself to implement strong biosecurity and, are finding it useful?
Yeah, I'm not going to name them because it wouldn't be fair, because it might all go wrong. And I'm touching wood here as well at the same time. I have a customer that we deal with a lot, and we've dealt with for quite a number of years, and we've made some quite significant changes to his premises and the way he does things. But he has 96,000 free range layers, which weren't free range when we were in lockdown, and he was literally surrounded by turkey and duck growers, which unfortunately ourselves and another company we've culled virtually every farm within a kilometre of him, and there was 5 or 6 of them that surrounded him, and he was absolutely petrified that he was that close that he was going to get it. But because of the way he did things, which really took a lot of toll out of him, because he ended up getting rid of quite a few workers that worked on other farms and things like that. He had to just do it with his bare minimal number of people. But his entry and exit systems from his poultry buildings are bang on, and he was really, really very insistent on everybody following the protocols properly. So to date, he had basically farms going down all around him over a nearly 3 month period. And they cleaned out as well, so there would have been potentially dust and muck in the atmosphere and stuff like that could have actually caused him a problem with blowing things. But actually, he managed to keep it out of the unit, and now the birds are outside and they're fine. And that was a real success story from my point of view, and I'm really chuffed. I'm loath to use him as an example though, because I don't want to jinx him, because he was doing such a good job. But the one thing he did admit, in that situation with all that going on around him, it was mentally really, really hard to actually keep going, because every little tiny setback or every normal mortality that he found, he was always worried about. But again, he just controlled what he could control, and he did a really good job at controlling that. So again, he's come through and he's been selling eggs all the time at a good price. So it's been he's doing well.
It's fantastic news, and I'm touching a lot of wood here because we don't want to jinx anything, but at a time when just you can't understand the mental pressure what would have been on this man, with having all of this going on around him, at a time when you just feel like the world's coming tumbling down around you, and when's it going to come to you? Hats off to him for keeping that composure and setting them protocols and procedures to ensure that he's safeguarded himself and his family and his business. So it's great to hear when them kind of things do happen.
Yeah, no, he's done a really good job.
On that note, we're at time now, Paul, and I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and I've no doubt I'll be speaking to you again over the next few days anyway, in other capacity. But that's it for this episode of the Farm Gate, and if you're looking to strengthen your farm's biosecurity and want practical support, we're here to help, so get in touch with us. We can offer our guidance and support to yourselves, and if you found this useful, follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes, and thank you all for listening. Goodbye.